Okay, welcome everybody to The Truth About Dyslexia. In today's episode, I have the amazing Elizabeth Harper, who sent me this amazing book. I'm not sure if that comes out correctly there, but I want it to be a pilot. It's a story about Franklin J. Macon. Have I pronounced his name right? Everyone who's dyslexic has a terrible to pronounce name. That's what I've learned.
You are close. Macon. He always said Macon.
Macon, and he was a pilot. He lived a very different life. He never, from what I hear, he never thought he'd write a book, but I thought it was a story that needed to be told. So thank you, Elizabeth, for being on the show today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's start. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey with Frank to put this book together, and a little bit about his story, because it seems such an interesting journey.
Sure. Yep. I grew up in Michigan in the United States, and my husband from in Georgia, but we were a military family, so we moved around a lot. And that's how we ended up meeting Frank when we were in Colorado. I was a teacher for years, and the last school I was at here in Colorado was what we would, I think you call it a residential school too. A lot of tough kids with tough home situations, but also a lot of learning challenges. And Frank would come in and speak to those kids, and they were just mesmerized. And I thought, oh, he has a really great story. And then we met some mutual friends for dinner, and they wanted to get Frank back in the air because he was a pilot. And we lived at the Air Force Academy, which is Air Force, a lot of pilots. And they took him on a 92nd birthday flight. And that day I drove, although Frank would kick me if I didn't tell you. He was still driving. He was 92 and he still drove his 86 stick shift Bronco. But they took him flying. And on the way home, the reporters, people, he said, everybody wants me to write a book. I said, well, why don't you? And he looked around, just grumbled. I hate to read and write. I'm dyslexic. So I offered to help. And 3 years later, we have his book. But he really set out to help kids who struggled with school. He had to repeat second grade. Frank was born in 1923. So nobody knew what dyslexia was. And the common people would say, oh, you're just dumb and that sort of thing. But thankfully, Frank always knew he was brilliant. He could go home and fix a car engine, build an airplane, built his own little radios during the Depression, his own toys. So he had this little sense, which the kids love and adults as well, that I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to make something of myself and I'm going to follow my dream. So that's kind of how we set out. And in that time when Frank and I started doing this, I was still teaching and had a lot of kids with different dyslexia, ADHD, and our own children were diagnosed with ADHD. So I really appreciate, I had listened to some of your stuff. Frank would appreciate it as well, recognizing it certainly is not just about reading and writing. It's a whole life skill set, totally different. Like Frank actually would say he saw in 3D, like in his brain,
Yes.
he saw it in 3D. Growing our kid, learning that from our kids as well. It's just been a tremendous help knowing it's an all-encompassing thing. It's not just when you have to write a paper or just read a book. It's everything. So you tackle everything differently.
It's so true, and something I'm trying to get to catch on at some point is as dyslexia and ADHD come together more often than not. I think they say 25 to 50% of dyslexics also have ADHD.
Correct.
I'm trying to name that, Elizabeth. So the name I've named it is Daddy issues. So little D dyslexia. I was like, we got to get that to catch on. Someone's got to think that's a hilarious idea at least. But it's, trying to bring some awareness to this, because I know for me personally, I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 10, didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was 33, 32, 33. And that, so many of us get part of the diagnosis journey, and you don't even know, like, who knows if Frank had some part of that as well. A lot of people learn to manage their ADHD as they get older as well. They get better at it, but it's one of these challenges. And I think, looking at Frank's story, and it's fantastic the way you've captured it, because stories these days don't seem as, I don't want to say interesting, but they don't seem as hard in the same way. There were different challenges, right? Different challenges they went through. And I was just wondering, is there a couple of stories from the book that, you think the audience would love to hear and give a taste of,
Sure.
you know,
Well, Frank was a stinker as a little kid because in reflection, because of his dyslexia. And no doubt he was never diagnosed, but he had ADHD. So in school, for example, in second grade, the first round, he was always messing around in the back row. He didn't want to be called on. He loved to learn, but he hated school. So he was messing around. The teacher put him in the front row. And it was around Christmas time. And somebody had given his teacher a box of chocolate covered cherries. And back then you could take a pocket knife to school. So he took his pocket knife. Yes, yes, yeah. Don't do that today. He cut out the bottom. He ate the cherry. And his great aunt who raised him he would say a caterist, but did food. He brought a jar of hot pepper flakes, poured them into the chocolate. After he sealed it back up and did that with every cherry, just because he was mad that teacher put him in the front seat or the front row. And so, of course, when she bit into it, he got dragged down to the principal's office by the ear and got a little swat back then. And to the day he died, he would say to me, I don't know how she knew it was me. And I thought, oh, Franklin, of course it was you because you were the one who just got moved to the front. So things like that. But he was raised by two great aunts. He did not know his real mother and father. And he always said that and the dyslexia were his hardest challenge. But the dyslexia was his greatest gift because he could problem solve. And he stood by that. So when he was a kid, the neighbors who babysat him brought him. There was an aircraft company in our town at the time that built bi-wing aircrafts. They were called Alexander Eagle Rock airplanes. Their boyfriends were pilots, so they tossed him in the back seat at the age of 4, and that's when he decided he was going to fly. So from that point on, every time he got out of school, he was trying to make an airplane. But I mean, that was the early 30s, 1930s. There weren't that many aircraft, but he would build wings, jump off the chicken coop. He took a rusted out water tank and filled it with, in our region, there were a lot of coal mines. So they had carbide, which was they used to use for the lights in the lamps for the coal miners' huts. You could buy that at the grocery store. So the kids would buy it, but it was combustible. So they filled that water tank, put it on their wagon, strapped it on. Of course, Frank was the test pilot, and they lit it on fire. They thought they were going to launch their rocket down the street, but instead it was like the world's greatest, blowtorch, almost blew up the neighborhood. But that's the kind of thing he did. He wasn't being naughty for meanness. It was curiosity. He took everything apart, put it back together, watches, clocks, car engines. The neighbor had an old Model A and a Model T. So when he was 5 and 6, he was helping them rebuild the engine. And
I think just stopping you there, there's such a good point. There's such a Elizabeth around intentionality is like there are a lot of dyslexic kids, that they might be seen as naughty, but deep down, if you ask yourself why are they doing this, and it's usually this deep curiosity to solve problems or to create something they've seen in their head, but they just don't glue together that what they do in reality is going to cause potentially a negative impact. And so I would really say for anyone who's got dyslexic kids or even no dyslexic adults, really try and breathe in and think and try and even feel the energy. What is the intention behind what the action is? Because, I've learned to do that over the years, and it really changes the way I react to people. Like I don't go, hey, your goal is to be mean or naughty or abusive. It's actually they've got a deeper challenge or deeper problem. Do you kind of get where I'm going with that?
Exactly. Yes. And Frank, in his 90s, obviously 2020 hindsight, but he said, I was not a naughty kid, but I was a naughty kid. He got that was back in the day of his two great aunts raised him. And the one who he called Mama would make him sit at the piano, play hymns to straighten him out. And Aunt Lala had her handy dandy paddle. So he got a lot of swats on the behind, but it was always about curiosity. So when Frank was still living and we would go to schools and speak, the first question he would ask is, who doesn't like school? Well, half the kids, because school's a challenge. don't care for school. And Frank didn't either, but he would say, I loved to learn. One year, Mama, his aunt, that great aunt who helped raise him, remarried. And that gentleman, who he called Old Man Loper, bought him a Mickey Mouse watch. Well, by the time he got home from work, Frank had it torn apart. He wanted to see exactly how it worked, how all those gears worked. And of course, he got in trouble with Mama. But Old Man Loper understood it because he was similar in his mechanical brain and said, good job, son. Now you know how it works. One time when he was little, he took, everybody had, not everybody, but most people, because of the Depression, everybody made their own clothes. So the kids had wooden spools with the thread on. And when they were empty, they'd make toys out of it. Well, Frank pounded them into the wall and made a gear system on the wall to figure out how to lift items and just how a lever works and the gears. Of course, he got in trouble. But again, it wasn't because he was trying to tear down the house. He was in his brain trying to create what he saw kind of in 3D in his brain of how to lift items.
That's so well said. And it kind of goes back to, like, I don't know if you've ever come across the Davis method of dyslexia. And, that's exactly the same thing. It's all done in plasticine where people can create what's in their mind. And it always brings me back to Ron Davis's story about how he was probably dyslexic, ADHD, autistic. He had a bit of everything, but his dad would hit him. And he couldn't work out why his dad hit him. And so he used plasticine to recreate what he did before he got hit. And that was how he saw cause and effect. And he went, if I do this, I get hit. So if I don't do this, I don't get hit. And, it seems quite simple, but for the dyslexic mind, we don't always see things in a line. We're not linear thinkers. So we don't, I always say we're kind of like cats. If you don't spray a cat with water when they're in the act of doing something bad, they don't understand why they're being punished. I think dyslexics are exactly the same. Like, you got to catch us in the act, spray us with water. So we go, oops. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure how we're allowed to do that anymore, but it's, do you know what I mean? And that's kind of what I'm hearing with Frank's story.
Yeah. Because he would tell the students and adults, he got a lot of spankings. He actually, though, because of his short attention span, would rather get a spanking and get off and play and get right back to it than have to sit at the piano for a half an hour and play the songs and the hymns and that Mama would make him do, because that would take too long. He wanted to keep moving, so he'd rather get that swat than have to sit.
Yeah, that's another great point, though. Like, it's kind of like that. Take the short pain rather than the long and drawn out kind of thing. Like, that's, especially if you've got the ADHD side, like, you just can't sit still that long.
Yeah,
you're tapping your foot and kind of going for it, right?
Exactly.
What was Frank like as he got a bit older, as he got out of being a child? And is there any stories that come to mind?
He was a treasure. First of all, he was a doer. He was a gentleman. Every time I'd go to his house, he could barely walk, by the time it got to be 96, 97, open the door for you and that sort of thing. But his brain was still constantly going. There was one time when we got the books in boxes from the publisher, and I said to Frank, I'll be over. Will you sign a few? And he said, sure. So I brought them over. I said, I'll come over and pick them up, but don't lift those boxes. Well, he wasn't going to listen to me. He had jerry-rigged a whole system from his living room table on a dolly with ropes and lifts to get them down off on the porch, down the stairs, so he could take them to my car without lifting them, with minimal. And that was at the age of 95. Yeah.
That's amazing, right? And this is, for anyone listening, I think this is the key. We sometimes can get really into the minutiae of dyslexia and ADHD, but the people that I see succeed, they have a purpose in life. They have like this love of it. They have this love of creating things, breaking things, solving problems until the end. And it's like, whatever that is for you. And like my grandmother, who's I'm 100% sure is neurodiverse, she's 93. And for her, she's got this weird interest in like over cleaning. Like, it's just her at the moment. But she'll get up and clean. She'll wash all the sheets every morning at 6 a.m. She's got this system, this routine that keeps her going, more on probably the ADHD autistic side. She but like that gives her a weird interest in life and it keeps her
Right.
going. And it sounds like Frank had that as well.
He did. And he actually was in really good health until he was 97. He took his last airplane flight on the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So he would have been 95. And, he climbed right up, a little assistance, but climbed right up the ladder. But you were talking on a different podcast, about observation. So Frank had some health issues that last year, was not at home. And another friend and I went and cleaned his house. We no more than got him in the door. And he said, "Who moved my curtains?" Like he knew we had dusted and moved something, and he hadn't even been in his house for 2 months. So, but the next thing he wanted to do is get to his basement, which was a shop and kind of a museum of his accomplishments as well. On the wall, pictures of things, but it was a woodworking shop. He was telling us how he was going to rearrange that. And he was 97 years old.
And this is the thing, I don't think our brains catch up to how old we get over time. Like, he must have known my wife, because anything I move in the house anywhere, she knows. She knows I've moved it. She knows it's no one else. She knows it's me. I'm not sure if I leave a scent when I move something, but it's the same thing, right? It's the way their minds work. And I think, that's amazing though with Frank and what his abilities were at that age. And like you guys have created the book, and what I heard is you've also just released the audio book. Is that floating around on Audible? Is that place?
It is it's on Audible and Scribd.
Oh, fantastic! I'm going to get it from Audible because I've read some of the book, but I was saying before this, I've read some of it. I really like it. I'm just an absolutely horrendous reader. Like I'll listen to audiobooks 2 or 3 hours a day if I can, but the minute I have to read it, like it puts me to sleep. Like it's probably my best sleep supplement is reading a book.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it also. You sent me this, which for anyone who's watching the video version on YouTube or Spotify, you'll be able to see this amazing piece. And I think I spent more time looking at this and playing with this than the actual book, because it's more of, and it's been designed for kids to try and get them motivated.
It has. Yep. And Frank wanted it in that format because back when he was a kid, he was by nature left-handed, but they made everybody be right-handed. So you can flip this way and write across and not have to hit that binding, was his purpose in that. And we were asked,
interesting.
Yeah, we were asked to do that for younger kids from a local group that really focuses on literacy. So we did do that activity book, and people can get it actually on our Etsy and just print it themselves. I have some bound ones here, but they wanted it to be where an adult would read to the kid and work together, not only talk about the history, but do some of the activities together. And if they struggled with reading, then it was kind of a twofold for younger kids.
Yeah, I'll make sure that's posted everywhere, because I think this is great for anyone who's got kids who want something that's actually practical, because some of the dyslexia stuff I've seen is quite, it's very formulaic and it's good in a certain way. But what I love about this is it's got a real story attached to it. Like everything's different. It's kind of like been done in a way with like Child's Mind, where it's not designed for adults. Do you know what I mean? Like some of the stuff feels like it's been designed by adults in a boring way. This is definitely not boring.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And Frank, that was real purposeful, because Frank was very creative. And even in the other book, some of the toys in the back, are instructions. But Frank was determined for kids to use their brain. And you had hit on the point of having purpose. He was big on purpose. He's like, everybody has God-given talents, and you have to find your talents and your purpose, because it's not the same. Everybody's different. Everybody is different. And everybody has different challenges. So he really wanted the kids not to do everything the same. That was kind of his thought behind that activity book, where here's a story, but you do your creative activity with it. But I don't want you, for as much as he loved Legos today, it is, you take one piece here. There's not much creativity to it. It's very specific, and there's no harm or foul in that. But Frank was big on, because he realized his creativity and thinking outside the box was really a gift. He wanted kids to realize that, because a lot of times, even in school, that's what I realized as a teacher, everything was maybe just linear, or the square peg had to go in the square hole. There was no thinking outside the box.
And I was thinking one of the other things, probably something I could ask you, being a teacher as well yourself, I'm thinking of a name for this podcast, and it's going to be something like, I hate school, but I love to learn. Because, I love that line because it's so true. Like, from what you've seen with neurodiverse kids, maybe your own, etc., is there 2 or 3 things that you see that help them learn over, like, the standard learning processes that really help, like, right brain thinkers, operate?
I think using your other senses is a tremendous benefit. If it's just paper and pencil, I don't think it gets reinforced, and I think it limits the creativity. At least for our two children, they're adults now, but they're still in college. If they can do an activity where their hands are moving or their feet are some part of their body is moving in addition to working their brain, it's in there. But if it's just staring at a piece of paper, they're thinking about 1,000 other things because of their ADHD, and they can't organize it and that sort of thing. Frank was the same way. If he could, like I said, school was really tough. Math was really hard for him, but he could see he was brilliant. I know you said in a couple of your podcasts, the memorization, he could memorize and see patterns. So once he recognized that, he used that to his advantage. But for example, multiplication for him, just the traditional way of learning multiplication tables did not work. He had to learn the patterns, and he would practice even in his piece. He would look at a license plate and look at the numbers. So if it had, for example, 8, 4, 6, 2, 3, 7, he would lump it and go, that's 3 sets of 10, because he could see that right away. And that's how he did his math. And that really helped him in the aviation world, because back when he flew, there were no computers. So all the maps, he could visualize all that, and the airspeed and the wind speed. And he actually, when he went to Tuskegee, helped a lot of the really academic pilots who struggled with the hands-on. He helped them with explaining the mechanical. And then they, of course, helped him with the academic part.
I think that's honestly a fantastic point. And I think so many of us, if you can find, especially as you grow up and as you become an adult, school kind of teaches us that there is a right way to do things. But in the real world, very rarely there is one way to do anything. Like,
Correct.
very rarely that exists. But we're kind of, I don't want to, beaten into you is the wrong word, but it's kind of drilled into you that you've got to go down this path and you've got to show your workings and stuff like that. But, I'd say my success is very similar. Is every time I hit a problem, I'm like, how can I do this that'll work for me? I don't care what other people think. How will I get to the result? Because in the real world, the only thing that matters is the result. It's like, if someone said to me, someone might take 10 hours, they might need to write all of this stuff down. It might take me 15 minutes to have a think about it, and I get to the same result.
Exactly.
It doesn't really matter, right? So, like, you just got to work on what are your strengths? How can you operate your brain to get the result, and not just beat yourself up that you can't do it the boring way these other people are doing it, right?
Right. And I think I know Frank would say that's why it was such a gift, but he had to get a little bit older to recognize that. And that's kind of what was in his heart to explain to young adults, the kids too, but young adults who are so frustrated. The point is, you don't learn like everybody else. So you have to figure out how you learn, because the real world is very different than school. And
yes,
school is great. You need to learn. He would tell the kids, you have to learn how to read. You have to learn how to do your math. However, you're just learning how to learn. The real world is where you're going to experience how to solve the problem and how to think outside the box and how to get the result you need. Frank was very similar. They would call him, he was the aircraft maintenance person at Fort Carson here, which is an Army base, for 23 years. And when they couldn't figure out how to get a helicopter or an aircraft back online, they would call Frank, because he would just think outside the box instead of just following steps 1 through 10 or whatever it may be. He would try some different things.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's the thing, is like, it's a skill that stays with you for life. And for, what I would say, we may need to wrap the podcast up now, but I think, like, realistically, for everybody out there who's listening to this, if you're beating yourself up that you're not getting something quite right, is just try and step to the side and look from a different perspective. Too many of us try and have these blinders on that we've been born with, kind of not born with, but trained into. Those blinders can come off. You can sometimes realize your eyes can pop out and look behind yourself as well. Like we're very different in that respect. The way we see things is so different. And so, and letting yourself do that and not beating yourself up for it, that is it. It happens to all of us at a different age, but that is kind of like the aha moment when a lot of stuff shifts, right?
Yep. And there were two quick things. Frank would always say, carry a tablet, like put your notes. So if you realize, then maybe 3 years later, you realize, oh, that was the answer, or why that didn't work then, but now I see it today. And the other thing he always said to all the kids and adults, he believed there was no such thing as failure. You can't think of yourself as a failure. You learn from it, and it might not turn out the way, but eventually you will see the success. You just can never quit.
Yeah, and that's such a big thing about time, Liz, what I see with a lot of dyslexics especially is because we struggle with the lineal time, we can't see the difference between I have failed in the moment and I am a failure for the rest of my life. Those two things are very different. And if you can get your head around going, I have failed, which is the moment, I'm not a failure, that shift it's really well said. And for everybody keen, so Amazon, they can grab the book, Etsy, they can grab the fun download, and then you've now got the book out on Audible. Does that sound right?
That is correct. Yep.
Brilliant. So everybody, we'll pop those in the show notes. Make sure the links are there. I recommend you grab it. It's a great story. I'm looking forward to the Audible story. I'm going to go and get it right after this podcast recording. So thank you so much for your time, Elizabeth. It has been a pleasure.
Likewise. I'm excited.
Fantastic.
I appreciate it. Frank would be very thrilled at what you're doing with the adult world and dyslexia. Because he was big on the trades. Yep.
Yeah. We just want to help as many people. Like there's a lot of adults out there like us that don't have the knowledge, Yeah. So thank you, everybody. We'll call it there.